Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
Good afternoon, or evening, or morning. Welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth with me, Peter Robbins, your host. If you are watching and listening right now, it is via KGRA Digital Broadcasting. That's KGRA-DB. You can be listening at their website or on their YouTube page or on Spreaker.com. Subscribe to KGRA and have full access to literally thousands of programs in their archive on UFOs and the paranormal. And subscribe using my name, my first name, as your code, and you'll receive a 30% discount. No monologue today. Got a lot to cover. Two very special guests, both dear friends of mine, and both remarkable individuals in their own right. James Clarkson has been an investigator for over 45 years in criminal justice, in the realm of UFO research, and he is an honorably discharged military police investigator who served for 20 years as a city police officer holding the titles of detective sergeant and fatal accident team supervisor. After retiring from the Aberdeen, Washington Police Department, he became a child abuse detective for 2 years, followed by 10 years service as a fraud investigator for Washington State. In 1987, he joined the Mutual UFO Network because of a lifelong interest in the UFO mystery. He served as the MUFON State Director for Washington from 2007 until 2017. James has investigated more than 1,500 reported UFO encounters. As part of his effort to explain the importance of the UFO subject to the public, he has lectured throughout the state of Washington, at major conferences, repeatedly across the country, and abroad. During a lecture in 1993, however, he met a lady named June Crain, who had worked in top-secret laboratories at Wright Patterson Air Force Base when she was young. Her life story is the basis of James' best-known titled book, Tell My Story, June Crain, the Air Force, and UFOs. Her revelations served as corroborating evidence in support of UFO crashes and UFO cover-ups. He has investigated and written about a crashed UFO in Westport, Washington State as well in 1979. James Clarkson lives in Port Townsend, Washington with his wife Joanne, a retired nurse. I should also say about the book, Tell My Story, June Crain, the Air Force and UFOs. It's a book that touched me tremendously and was the impetus for Jim and I connecting up when I heard him for the first time speak about the book. More about that later, though. James Clarkson, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth, my friend.
Peter, it's a pleasure to talk to you anytime, but more especially here and now.
How you doing, as we say in Brooklyn, all things considered?
Well, all things considered, I'm in a great place. I had some near misses last fall with some serious health problems. And thankfully, I am a miracle of modern medical technology, and I'm better than I've been in many years.
And almost totally bionic. No.
Yes. I set off every alarm at the airport every time I go through.
Show off.
Yes.
Jim, we've known each other for years now, and it occurs to me, I don't remember offhand you telling me where you were born. Where was that?
I was born actually on the other side of the country in Portsmouth, Virginia, in the Naval Hospital. My father was coming to the end of about 6.5 years in the Navy, and he had to make a decision about staying or going. And they wouldn't let him have shore leave for my birth. And he decided, I'm going to be a civilian. So after he got out and worked a couple of different jobs back there, I arrived in San Francisco, according to my father and mother, about the size of a loaf of bread, just a wee person. And that's how I ended up on the West Coast.
Is a good time to bring in our first image here.
That's my father, Curtis Clarkson. And there I am on the bed. And that was when he was a chief petty officer. He served in the Navy for over 7 years. And the way it started was he came out of the back hills of Kentucky. His mother wanted him to be a minister because he did very, very well in high school. His dad wanted him to work on the farm, and he didn't want to do either one. So I checked the dates, and it was 5 days after his 17th birthday in April of 1941. He enlisted in the Navy.
Oh, boy.
So he was already in the Navy when December 7th happened on the West Coast, when Pearl Harbor became a national reality and the United States entered World War II.
Jim, did he ever talk to you about that moment in his life?
That particular moment?
Well, yes. Actually, his first awareness of Pearl Harbor?
No, I actually not. But I know all of his sea stories backwards, forwards, and sideways. He did tell me that the biggest thing was the level of fear, especially for the people in California and on the West Coast. They thought that Japan was going to invade.
Yes.
And everyone was convinced of that. There were the draft off the offices where people could enlist. They had lines of people volunteering. It changed everything. My mother, of course, my mom and dad would have never met if it had not been for World War II. I've thought about that a lot. It turned out the same thing was true of Joanne. There was a great mixing of people from different parts of the United States who had nothing in common just because of the war. And people were desperate to connect, especially GIs who thought that they might not be coming back.
That's right.
A lot of rapid marriages and everything else.
I'm in the same boat. I wouldn't be here if my parents hadn't met also under very specific situations during World War II. Here's a picture that I really adored.
Yes, that's my mom and me as a little guy.
Your mom was gorgeous.
She was. And I will tell you the big family secret that was never revealed that I did not know until I was 21.
Don't tell me she wasn't a natural blonde. Jim? Oh, what a time to freeze.
I know. But she was 7 years older than my father.
I love it.
And
how sophisticated and different than most marriages.
She never looked the part, ever, even at the end of her life.
Wow.
She always looked way younger. She also, when they met, she was originally in Oakland, California. She was a waitress in a little hamburger joint, and her other job was welding on the Liberty ships. Many women were recruited as welders, especially my mother was short, and they wanted small-statured people to do welding in close quarters in those bulkheads.
Wow.
And I kind of wondered if maybe that had something to do with her getting cancer later in life. I don't know. But one day, a slightly intoxicated sailor came in, and she was very attracted to him, and we had a sporadic moment, I believe. In the event, she was afraid that he might not remember that they had made a date, And she told that story a couple of times, and my dad would always pipe up in the background and say, I may have been drunk, but I wasn't that drunk. And they were married for 37 years, and I guess I'm thankfully the product of a classic middle-class home. My father, if he wasn't at work, he was at home with the family.
Ah,
My mother was a homemaker.
yeah.
And that's where I got my start. I included this picture because I tried to think, well, how did I become interested in everything in the universe?
Ah,
And it's because of in Golden Gate Park in San Francisco,
yeah,
we had the Steinhardt Aquarium,
yeah.
the De Young Museum, and the Morrison Planetarium.
Oh
We're
gosh,
all right
that's
there in
right.
the complex. And they cost little or nothing for people to go in. And I spent hours looking at everything over and over. We went lots of times and sitting in the planetarium, because anybody who's ever been to a planetarium show, I'm sure they're all the same at the end, which is that they play ethereal music and they bring images of stars that move
Yeah.
across the ceiling, and you get this feeling of being way out there in space.
Yes.
And it's quite an illusion. And I remember attending one planetarium show where they talked about the possibility of extraterrestrial life. And they had very carefully created a landscape on Mars with ultra futuristic buildings worked into the landscape. It was very clever and quite impressive, and I never forgot it.
And I was going to say, you never forgot it.
Yes. So
I
that's
have,
where I became curious.
yeah, I have a very similar set of memories going back to elementary school field trips to the Hayden Planetarium, which is part of the wonderful Museum of Natural History in Manhattan. And that same feeling of the wonder of all the questions in the world coming to you and sort of a welcome opportunity to ask them to yourself. Um, about what age were you, Jim, when you mastered reading? What I mean by that is got beyond the children's book stage and could go to the library or the children's
I
library
know
or
exactly when it was. I was in the second grade. I read my first science fiction novel, and I can't remember the title, but the author was Andre Norton.
wow, by the second grade. Well done.
And I've been a voracious reader all my life,
Yeah.
even to this day. I've always got 2 or 3 books going.
Yes.
A lot of them are for fun, I admit, but my father, the biggest lesson he gave me was never stop learning.
Ah,
He
yeah.
said, for all of your life, you will never stop learning.
It. I don't think a parent could ever give a better admonition to a young person. That idea of some poor, angry, or recalcitrant soul, say to themselves, "Well, that's enough of information. I've learned everything I need to. Thank you very much. You have a question, you can ask me." What a sad situation to think that you are not interested in learning. At I think 97 or 98 years old, a friend interviewing my dad on a radio show, he had just published a memoir which he had written starting at 95 years old, and pretty damn good book. What was it that kept him, waking up in the morning after a lot of loss and good things in his life, but just what kept him coming back? What was it? What was the drive mechanism? And I thought to myself, I want to know the answer to this question. This is going to be good. And he was quiet for a moment and thought about it. And he said, quote unquote, I want to see how things turn out.
I
And
love it.
he got to see how things turned out till he was 98 and a half years old. But that spirit of inquiry that you and I share, that brought us together in this work. When you started to wake up to the world of film, was it through the family television, or your family would go to the film movie house together, or
both. My mother came out of an orphanage in Iowa. The family broke up because of the Depression. And she was stuck there until her older brother Preen, who had been to California went and got her and said, I'm going to move you out here because there are jobs and opportunities. And so that's how she ended up in Oakland and was in the right place at the right time to meet my dad, etc.
Oh my
But
gosh.
I don't know how she did it, but for her, she always said the space people are real. From the earliest childhood, for her, it was not a question. She said, I know the space people are real. And looking back on it, I wish that I would have questioned her more about that. I mean, there's people come and go in your life and then they're gone and you think, well, God, why didn't I ask that when I had the chance? But she knew it wasn't a question.
I think for some people, obviously there's a possibility that they had an experience or a sighting or something like that. Other people are simply voraciously open-minded, and it's illogical to think that we are alone in the universe. Good for her for having that mind and for instilling some of that thinking into you. Was it she who kind of brought you into the orbit of going to movies? And what kind of films did you like as a young person?
I like science fiction primarily, and I can't tell you the order of the movies or whatever, but I was thinking about this recently, putting the biography together. My mother took me to the old Fox Theater in San Francisco before it was torn down in 1963. And this was a theater experience at a whole other level that is not available now, where they had uniformed ushers. I think the Fox Theater, you could seat 4,000 people in there.
Oh my God.
Huge ornate snack bars with indirect neon lighting and Art Deco everything, and huge draperies, and everything was ornate and plush and over the top. And just going to the theater was an experience, even aside from the movie.
For me, the closest I came to that was occasionally my grandfather would take me to a film at Radio City Music Hall, which is, Art Deco perfection and seats 5,000 people. Even if you visit New York City, I encourage anybody to take the tour. When there's nothing going on there, just take the tour of this extraordinary facility. You feel like you're back in 1930 in terms of high Art Deco, but the experience of going to the movies, and to think that when the Fox opened and Radio City, people would be sitting there looking at 30-foot close-ups of, actors' faces at a time when, this was the most glorious thing in the world. As you move through into high school, at a certain point, the reality of, I've got to make a decision here. Your families either had the money to put their kids into college or university, or they didn't. And if they didn't, it was a matter of getting a job, joining the service, getting a scholarship if possible. What was that matrix for you of being in high school, doing your work, thinking about your future? What did you decide, and where did it lead you?
Well, because I got extremely good grades all through elementary school. So an opportunity was presented for me to take a test and go into a prep school in San Francisco. Had a very strange name. It's called Lick-Wilmerding. And it was an industrial arts college and a prep school that merged. And it was privately endowed. And I guess the short description is that back then, the sons of the richest families in San Francisco would the sons would go to that school in anticipation of going to Ivy League colleges and universities. We only had like 250 people in the whole school.
Wow.
So I graduated first honors from that. I ended up in the University of California, but this is also the 1960s. And I went through my own personal rebellion, probably drove my parents crazy, gave them sleepless nights. I ended up, the shortest way to say it is that eventually, for a variety of reasons, I rebelled against the rebellion. I cut my hair off. I moved home. And within a year, I had enlisted in the U.S. Army because in the back of my mind at an early age, I had always wanted to go into law enforcement. That's a portrait of the artist as a young man.
Wow, looking sharp and serious.
Yes, military police school in Fort Gordon, Georgia.
What was that like, if I might ask?
Actually, after basic training, it was a piece of cake. Nobody ever wants to go through basic training twice. But MP school, they treated you more like a human being. You had pretty regular hours. And I was very interested in law enforcement, so I liked the classwork. They had driving, hand-to-hand combat, shooting, the law, classes on jurisdiction, classes on interviews and interrogations, evidence procedures. This is all nuts and bolts police skills. And I loved it. I thought it was great.
Boy, keep going.
My whole life changed, and it's funny. I was thinking about this too, how often this crops up for everybody. One particular conversation that you're part of or you overhear changes your entire life, and you don't see it coming. One day, we were coming back from lunch, and they announced that they were going to have openings. We were all about to graduate, and they said, being the Army, they said, we're not promising you anything. We'll send you wherever we want to send you. But we have openings in the following places for newly minted MPs. And if you ask for it and it's available, we'll give it to you. Well, I heard a bunch of guys talking about how they couldn't wait to get back to Seattle and Tacoma. And I didn't want to go back to the San Francisco Bay Area. There's a long story there. But I had always had this feeling about moving north. And I thought, let's give Washington State a try. And I arrived in Washington State very early in 1975, and I've never regretted that decision. I love it up here. It's beautiful.
Once you had your training, where were you originally deployed?
Well, this photo is
actually, let me take that back. When you were still an MP in the Army.
I was at Fort Lewis, Washington, which now is called Joint Base Lewis McChord. It's right outside of Tacoma, right next to I-5. It is a very, very large military base. But even back then, when I was writing a resume, they had people there. When I was getting out, they had people to help you write your resume. And he said, don't tell them you're a military policeman. He says, tell them you were a detective on the 5th largest city in Washington State. Because technically during the daytime, when it fills up with thousands of employees, Fort Lewis was indeed the 5th largest city.
I'll be damned.
And now it's even bigger because they've attached the Air Force base to it.
The routine of the Army, the training, the discipline, you still have time to think your private thoughts. Your mother's remarks when you were young aside about that the space people are a reality, when did you first either become seriously aware of or start to think about this phenomena that we call truly anomalous UFOs?
Well, I guess you could say I already had it as a hobby, because back in about 1966, I listened to KGO radio in San Francisco, and they were interviewing an author named John G. Fuller, who had just an extraordinary author, who had just come out with a book called Incident at Exeter. And I believe he had previously authored what was then the definitive work on the Betty and Barney Hill alien abduction case, titled The Interrupted Journey.
Yes.
But the Incident at Exeter was about this series of UFO sightings, and the heart of the whole story involved close encounters with a giant glowing disc with scintillating red lights going around it, and on-duty police officers.
There you go. The key witnesses. That's it.
So there I am. There's Jim Clarkson in a nutshell.
Hmm.
The paths of my life inextricably woven at that moment. And I didn't realize how much so, but I never forgot that radio show. I started collecting magazine articles, books. I've never had, now Joanne will argue with me, I've never had a bona fide hardcore UFO sighting. I am frequently envious of the people I interview. And people always ask me, well, have you had a sighting of your own? And I always say, always a bridesmaid, never a bride. I'm still waiting. But so if there's an alien listening out there who wants to talk to me, I'm available. But this does lead up to Fort Lewis.
Yeah.
One day I was on duty. By then I had become a plainclothes military policeman.
Yeah.
And I tried to think, what's the best way of describing my job? I was the kind of detective on a military base, like the characters in the old show Barney Miller on television. We were street detectives. We got out there and mixed it up and did some undercover work, some overt work. We responded to scenes that required follow-up investigation. We did all kinds of things.
Sure.
It was a job with a huge variety and a lot of challenges and a very heavy workload, and I loved it. Well, one night I'm up there in the military police station at Fort Lewis, and I'm looking down at the desk sergeant's desktop. Has a huge piece of plexiglass on it, and underneath it I see a business card, and it says National UFO Reporting Center.
Oh, for gosh sakes.
206-722-3000. It's totally impressed in my brain. I said, Sarge, what's this? And he looks at me completely matter of fact and says, that's where we report UFOs. Wow. And I went, oh, really? And we went on and we had a really lively discussion about something he had seen in Germany and all of that. And it was interesting. But it wasn't until years later that I recalled that particular phone number, and that opened doors for me because I believe it was in either late November or early December of 1986. Kenji Toroshi was flying a 747 JAL cargo liner into Anchorage, Alaska, when he observed a UFO that was enormous.
Massive.
And it was, at first the FAA had it on radar, then they didn't have it on radar, then they did, then they didn't. It all depended on, who was asking and who had been there telling them not to talk about it. So, but I was totally blown away by that sighting. And in fact, they sent me the press release packet. I still have it in the drawer. It's got like 30 pages of diagrams and statements from that case. Beautiful. Well, I called the phone number, 206-722-3000. A man named Robert Gribble answers the phone. Now, bear in mind, this is years. I got out of the Army in 1977.
Okay.
In 1979, I got hired by the Aberdeen, Washington Police Department. And it wasn't until a few years later, I was a pretty seasoned officer by then. And that's when this sighting happened. That's a picture of me with the Aberdeen Police Department. And I called that phone number. Robert Gribble answered it. He was a retired Seattle firefighter who had founded the National UFO Reporting Center out of his own pocket. And it was a labor of love because you got to bear in mind, there's no internet. There's no electronic forms online, no web pages, none of that. He would take phone calls, write the information down, type it up, make up a newsletter, mimeograph it, put it in an envelope, mail it to his mailing list. I mean, there's a lot of steps, a huge amount of work. But he did it because he loved it. He's totally dedicated. When he got too old, he passed the torch to a man I am honored to call friend for many years, Peter Davenport.
Yes, exactly.
who runs the National UFO Reporting Center and who has demonstrated dedication to the UFO field above and beyond the call of duty
Yes.
at a level that I don't even know how he stays in harness, but he does.
Peter's remarkable.
Yes.
I'm thinking as you're talking, first, by way of introduction to the literature, which is a pretty broad-based term, you were fortunate to zone in on, because of hearing this interview on the radio, two of the finest investigative books on the UFO subject ever written, and by a real journalist.
Yeah.
John Fuller was a marvelous investigator, researcher, very tenacious, and a terrific writer. And that pair of books, you couldn't do better than to be introduced to the general subject by his work. And that hook of the Exeter incident being built around the accounts of respected, serving, local, well-known community, lifelong resident police officers. It's a case that I carry with me in a more than normal way, in that it's fascinated me for decades and led to the honor of my being a co-founder 9 or 10 years ago of the Exeter, New Hampshire, the annual UFO Festival and Conference, which, like so many conferences, has been pushed back 2 years. But as of this week, I am very delighted to say is back in gear, and we will be returning to Exeter, New Hampshire on Labor Day weekend with a full weekend conference. Jim, you make the change from military police to serving civilian police. God knows we live in a different time now where, news usually means bad news. And the word police in the news usually means a police officer overreacting, using inappropriate pressure, not holding up the right, level of behavior, of not being properly trained. But of course, we don't hear about the overwhelmingly large number of police officers who protect and serve, do as good a job as they can, care about their communities, and are decent people. Without getting really deep into the subject, was your experience of being a serving police officer in a busy police department that basically, I'm proud to be here, I like my colleagues, we do a good job, and occasionally there's a screw up?
That's the best. I couldn't say it much better than that. I thought of an anecdote while you were giving that description. One of the first times that I was a patrol supervisor, a very young officer pulled over a motorcyclist, and he was part of a quasi motorcycle gang, but I knew from experience that this particular gang, they did a lot of charity work. They wanted to look worse than they were,
as many bikers do.
Yes. So he pulls the one motorcycle over, and he's got the driver, and all of the buddies pull over with the officer. Now, he's kind of panicking. So I arrive as the shift supervisor, and I don't really like the looks of this either, because there's way too many of them, and there's only two of us. And I could see that, this really could go downhill. And it was a pretty trivial violation. But this one guy came up, and he turned out to be the sergeant of arms for the main chapter of this group in Washington State, I think. And he had this he hands me a business card. And I look at the motto, and I started laughing. And that was not probably the best decision. But I said, wait a minute, you don't understand. I said, this is really funny. And the motto was, when we do right, no one remembers.
Oh, wow.
No one forgets. And I said, you don't realize how perfect that is. I said, that applies to cops just as well as it does to you.
You bet.
If one cop does something bad, we're all bad.
Yeah.
If one cop does something good, everybody goes, well, we expect cops to do that. So they take
You can't win in that sense. The media's a machine. It just eats people up and spits them out. And unfortunately, this is
on everything. It distorts our whole view. It makes us live in way too much fear in this world.
Yeah.
It doesn't connect us properly.
Well, there's really only two forces at play in this world. We call them different things. There is fear and there is love. And at a certain point, about this point in your life, one of them dominates and your life changes in a major way.
Yeah.
How did you manage to get this gorgeous woman interested in you?
I don't
Tell
know.
us.
To this day, I still wonder. But we actually met because of Bigfoot.
As one does.
No, I know. This is true.
We're all ears.
Well, I guess I better go ahead with the story.
She was dating Bigfoot and it didn't work out.
That's right. But he just tracked too much mud into the house. But I was up at the sheriff's office. This is after 1993. Actually, it was in 1993. And I was there to get a subpoena or something. I was detective sergeant by this point. So I'm waiting for my papers, and here's this really attractive librarian, and she's waiting for the sheriff to come out, because normally the sheriff would come down and do a program annually, a public presentation in the Aberdeen Library about Bigfoot. And he had plaster casts and all these really cool Bigfoot props. And he would tell all these stories, and it was a very popular program.
You bet.
Well, he couldn't do it that year because something came up at the last minute. So Joanne had volunteered to come get the props and do the program herself. Well, I wasn't born yesterday. So I said, can I help carry that to your car? Well, then it got even better, because she had recently done something in the library that involved UFO books. So as I'm putting this box of Bigfoot stuff in her car, I see that there are all these UFO books.
Oh, boy.
My eyes are getting really wide, and I'm thinking,
this is the girl I've been waiting for.
If you don't follow up on this, you're crazy. So we went I think we went to a nearby lake, and we ended up sitting there talking for a 3 hours. And then we went on our first date on July 4th of 1993.
Wow.
Now, because I was a blockhead, to make a long story short, we didn't get married until 1998. But we have been married ever since, thank God.
Mm-hmm.
And I am truly fortunate that Joanne is in my life.
Yeah.
And she is the one who, I've made the comment before, behind every successful ufologist, there's a very surprised wife. Or
Amen.
at least a tolerant one.
Well, once you were married and you continued your UFO related work, as I suggested in my introduction to you, you met another woman.
Yeah.
Not a romantic conflict here, but a woman whose life story changed your life story. And once again, as somebody who is an avid reader, who loves books, who loves libraries, who proselytizes about people building their libraries, who has worked at 2 libraries in my life, I am, looks like I've gone off camera here. Librarians for me are very special people. And the fact that you met this woman because she had come to a talk of yours at a local library. Can you tell us a little about her and about your meeting?
Yes. I should just back up and say that once Joanne and I started dating, one thing that librarians always try to do is to get more people into the library. And having a successful program that is delivered to, by and large, teenage and above male adults, etc., she got me to start doing UFO programs. She said, well, you know all this. Why don't you just present to the public? So I dabbled in it. I had never attempted public speaking seriously before. But it turned out I was a big hit. They had all these people showing up. So I ended up at the Ocean Shores Library. And I gave my program. Quite a few people attended. But at the very end of it, this very stern-looking woman approaches me Now, that picture you had on the screen was
Very young.
June. That picture was taken in 1947.
Oh my gosh, how pregnant that moment must have
Oh,
been for
yeah.
her.
When I met her, this is in 1997.
Mm-hmm.
So quite a few years had elapsed. She is an elderly lady. She lost her first two husbands. So she's a widow. She lives in Ocean Shores, Washington. She's a pillar of the community. In fact, she led the charity drive, basically strong arming the wealthy people around there to donate to build a new and better library for the city.
Oh.
She approaches me. I don't know much about her at that point, and she says, "You're right. The government knows all about UFOs, and they're keeping it a secret." And I could tell she's deadly serious. I said, "Well, how do you know?" And she says, "Because I worked there." And I thought, whoa, that kind of set me back, because I've had people spin that yarn for me before, and it turned
You
out
bet.
that they didn't. There was nothing. I just knew that she was completely serious.
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, tell me more." And she says, "I can't. They'll come and arrest me." And I think she was afraid of me, because I did not make it a secret. I said, although what I'm presenting, I said, in my normal life, I'm a police officer. In fact, I'm a detective sergeant. But I said, nothing that I say here is authorized by the police department. This is me telling you about something that I learned independently.
Yes.
It took her 4 years to decide. I met her in 1993, rather. It took her 4 years to decide to disclose to me.
Good for her.
Yeah.
Good for her. This
And
was a life and death decision.
Well, I think her cancer had come back more than she was willing to admit.
Mm.
And in 1997, which was a banner year for UFOs,
50th anniversary of Roswell and Kenneth Arnold.
March 13th, 1997, we have the Phoenix Lights, which is a hugely significant UFO sighting.
Yes.
Monumental.
Yeah.
You can dial in Peter Davenport. He'll give you everything about that one, or Dr. Lynn Kitai. Both authorities on how monumental that sighting was. Well, that is in the news. Then we have the 50th anniversary of the Roswell crash coming up. And suddenly the Air Force decides, well, we're going to tell them the truth about Roswell.
Case closed.
Yes, case closed. They published the book. It's all over CNN. It backfired in June's case.
It was a joke.
She sees the news coverage. She gets mad, and she decides, I've had it.
Good.
So she calls me on the phone out of the blue. I haven't heard from her in 4 years. And she says, "It's a damn lie."
Oh.
I go, "Well, good to talk to you, June. How are you?" And she says, "Have you been watching CNN?" And I said, "Well, yes." And so we start talking about, she says, "That's the same lie that we were required to tell when I worked there. We were always telling people that what they saw were weather balloons." Said they're still doing it. They're still doing the same thing. And she said, "Those are parachute dummies. Everybody knows what they look like. They made up a 6-foot-high mannequin of a GI in order to test parachutes."
Also, it was 7 years off the actual date.
And not only that, it turned out that amongst her various assignments at Wright Patterson Air Force Base, because she grew up in Dayton, Ohio, it turns out that she was in the parachute branch for a long time and worked with scientists and engineers who were developing parachutes to drop heavy payloads onto a battlefield. At one point, she was involved in an extremely classified project where they were building a parachute harness for a hydrogen bomb to drop out of a B-36 bomber. And that project was so classified, it was called Project Caucasian, that the code name meant nothing to anybody outside of the military until 2 years after June died. They finally declassified it. I asked everybody after she passed on it, "Have you ever heard of Project Caucasian?" Nobody had ever heard of it. 2 years later, they declassify it. Project Caucasian turns out to be a parachute experiment. And it would have been highly classified. Anything to do with a nuclear weapon had the highest levels of security. I mean, all these things, I learned so much from June. Well, what happened was that after she decided to disclose, I saw a golden opportunity. And I also became friends with June. And I started going to her house. And we told each other our life stories. Finally, she decided to give me her personal papers. And I never asked for this, but out of the blue, I got a letter from her attorney.
Oh, my.
Giving me the rights to her life story.
Wow.
And it says on there, in return for friendship when I needed it most.
Oh, my God.
Which really got me.
Yeah.
And what got me more was that when she died, I only got to know her well for a little over a year. And then in August of 1998, her cancer became terminal. And she ended up on hospice over in Hoquiam, Washington, the city next door to Aberdeen. And the last conversation I had with her, I said, "What do you want me to do, June?" Because by then I had all of her papers. I had tape recordings. I had notepads full of notes from our conversations. And she said, "Tell my story." That's obviously where I got the title of the book.
Well, not only do you tell her story in this book, titled Tell My Story, June Crain, the Air Force and UFOs, you tell it extremely well. And our friendship begins in Nevada years ago with your sharing that, I believe, for the first time at a major UFO conference.
Yes.
And I remember sitting there in the audience with a couple hundred other people thinking, this is golden. This is unique. This combination of this UFO investigator, military police officer, interfacing with this particular woman at this moment and her giving, well, I mean, I marched before the applause was over. I was backstage talking to you. I was just knocked out. And I encourage listeners and viewers to read the books of guests. Well, add this one to your book, to your list. Your one on the crash in Washington State in 1979, fascinating and very well investigated. This is just so human. And we need as many heroes as we can get in this work. And if they're women, all the better, as far as I'm concerned.
Yes.
But you will meet this woman in Jim's book, and I can't recommend it highly enough. Jim, what I'd like to do is, with the time we have left in the first hour, start to move through some of the photos that we have here in a more lively manner, because June's work got you much more deeply involved. And
these were June's friends. This was a picture of people that she knew at Wright Patterson. She grew up in Dayton, Ohio.
Wow.
She was able to tell me about the night that Pearl Harbor happened and how before that night, there wasn't even a fence around Wright Field.
Oh my gosh.
Because they had never thought that they had a security problem.
America was so much more innocent then, good Lord.
And so they put sentries out. She remembers the Army trucks pulling up, the sentries jump out, and they put man to man, a man every so many feet, a soldier with a rifle surrounding the entire base until they could build a fence and guard posts.
Amazing.
And of course, eventually, Wright Field became Wright Patterson.
Yeah.
And by the time World War II was in high gear, it had become the heart of the Air Force. And it became a place that employed thousands and thousands of civilian employees, engineers, scientists, and military people trying to advance the cause of United States air power.
Your involvement with June led you into the work of hardcore UFO research, kind of in the center of the zone. And this photo here of Glenn Dennis and you and Joanne in certainly one of the finest UFO libraries in the world, the one attached to the UFO Museum and Research Center there in the background.
Yes.
Glenn Dennis has emerged as a more controversial figure in the years since his death, and his account is somewhat questioned. But tell us a bit about your sense of Glenn Dennis.
I think that Glenn Dennis was, I'll just say it, I think he was a completely honest man. I think he was misunderstood.
Mm.
And I brought this copy of the June transcript and donated it to the museum. I printed
fabulous.
It on heavy paper, and I inserted photographs and tried to give them something that would be a good exhibit. That was before I wrote the book.
Yeah.
And while I was there, I think their way of saying thank you, they introduced me to Walter Haut and to Glenn Dennis.
Yeah.
Walter had something else to do. Glenn and I went into an office, and I got to sit with him and have coffee for the better part of an hour. When I left there, whatever doubt I had about the reality of the Roswell crash was gone. And I can tell you that the greatest regret of his life was the fact that he had felt annoyed by UFO researchers. He felt badgered. And so he made up a name for the nurse and gave it to one of the researchers. In other words, and they turned that around and said, well,
you lied, right? Thrown back in his face. I remember, and the damage done. Glenn, by the way, was a local mortician. He ran a funeral home.
Yes.
And he was the person who was contacted by the base relative to finding out a most chilling question immediately following the recovery of the crash materials, which was, do you have in stock any children's size coffins?
Yeah. What an interesting question that is.
Especially since it's a small town at the time. Everybody knew no kids had tragically been killed.
Exactly.
And Walter Haut, by the way, base information officer, an important founder of the Museum and Research Center, and a man who enters
patriotic man.
Yeah, enters deeply into the story. Yes.
Yes, this was getting into the big leagues for me. I ended up on the Veterans Day weekend of 2001, right after 9/11, being the lecturer. They were giving, like, I think, weekly or monthly lectures at the UFO Museum in Roswell. And I thought, wow, this is heaven. Well, it turned out that was the beginning of many more adventures and better things, but I never forgot that trip.
Yeah.
Especially because, just I will tell you, have you ever had a perfect airline connection? I actually did. And this was right after 9/11, which don't ask me how. I went wheels up at SeaTac Airport in Seattle to wheels down in Roswell, New Mexico in 5 hours.
Way to go.
Oh, yeah. Everything clicked. I walked off of one plane and walked on to the next one. It could not have been more perfect.
Well, wait a minute. You're not in New Mexico here.
No, I'm not. Joanne and I had an opportunity in 2010 to go to Paris for 2 weeks.
Yes.
And it was life-changing and magnificent.
Yeah.
And since we were going to be over there, I contacted a group in Paris. And so I got to present to Les Repas Ufologiques. And they meet in the West End of Paris once a month. They have a dinner meeting. And they have a guest UFO speaker.
I've had the honor.
And it was so much fun. I love those people. And I love Paris. I freely admit it.
I do too.
A classic tourist. I can't get enough. And I think in another life, I must have lived there. That's the I love you wall in the MoMA.
Oh.
Every way that you can say I love you on earth is written on that wall.
We can use more of that right now.
Absolutely.
Believe it or not, and that is our dear friend, the Renaissance man, Paul Davids, with
Yes.
your amazing wife. We are coming into the end of our first hour, Jim. So I'm going to remind our listeners and viewers that this is Peter Robbins and my guest, James Clarkson, talking about Jim's work on Meanwhile Here on Earth. We will return in 4 minutes with our other guest, Joanne Clarkson. Come back in 4.
Hey members, the new KGRA-DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA-DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA-DB.
Welcome to the new KGRA digital broadcasting website, thekgradb.com. Here you'll find great new content, including the KGRA Classics, great shows from our archives. You'll be able to see the show times and information so you can see what show is currently on air. The on-air live button, so just go to this section and you'll be able to hear the show live with exceptional sound quality. We also have the Vault section. Make sure to subscribe to get access to great content and special features. We have the make content for our latest news and events, so make sure to sign up and you can be part of our forum. So make sure to check out the new KGRA digital broadcasting website, thekgradb.com. We look forward to seeing you there, and we hope that you enjoy the new website.
I don't want to talk about it.
I don't want to talk about it.
Families don't have to talk about everything, but they should talk about how to plan for an emergency. Get tips and resources to make your family's emergency plan.
Discover the Observation Deck, a one-of-a-kind virtual event platform that takes video conferencing to the next level by using avatars to navigate a campus. There's so many areas and activities to choose from. There's a 1,000-seat auditorium, an expo hall, a nightclub, and even a beach. So come attend a conference, take a class, or hear a lecture on the incredible Observation Deck campus. Go to theobservationdk.com.
And welcome back. This is Peter Robbins with Meanwhile Here on Earth, bringing on our second guest for the evening. Joanne Clarkson grew up with ghosts and angels that her whole family accepted. In this way, she was lucky. No one thought it was strange or wrong when she spoke of the dead or received messages from them. Her communications with lives beyond this one have never seemed unusual to her, nor her lifelong connection with a specific angel. Joanne has been telling fortunes her whole life, and accurately as I can understand. Clarkson has never made her living as a psychic, but has supplemented her income doing so over the years. Originally, she felt her vocation was to be a nurse, and upon graduating from high school, she went to college for that purpose. But at the time found the work to be too challenging when it came to caring for suffering patients. Instead, she earned a degree in English and a master's in library and information science, and worked as a professional librarian for more than 20 years. After caring for her mother through a long illness, She re-careered as a registered nurse. And hold it a second, I see my camera's out. Okay. And spent another 15 years working in the home health care, especially in hospice. Along the way, she met and married James Clarkson. They had a son and daughter, Jim having 2 daughters and a son from his previous marriage. Now the couple are retired. She's been devoting more of her time to psychic work. She does readings once a month at the local metaphysical store, Phoenix Rising, and also gives readings in person, by phone, and on Zoom. Assisted by a number of spirit guides, she gives readings that are positive and geared toward helping people uncovered and embracing talents and purposes that they have for this lifetime. Joanne has been reading and writing poetry since childhood, winning her first poetry contest in the 4th grade. Her first full-length collection, Earth Tones, was published when she was in her 20s. Pacing the Moon, poems mostly about being a young mother, came out in 1987 and was reprinted in 92. Her Crossing Without Daughters was published in 1997. And in 2014, a chapter book about her hospice work, Believing the Body, was published. And The Fates, a full-length poetry collection, won the Bright Hill Press annual contest the year that it was published, which was 2017. Joanne has also written a nonfiction book about her hospice years entitled There's Always a Miracle. You can find more about Joanne at her websites, Joanne, Joanne, Clarkson.com for poetry, and JoanneThePsychic.com for psychic work. And given her husband's longtime involvement in the world of UFO investigations, and does she have any interest in the subject? Well, I'll hold that question for now. But Joanne Clarkson, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth.
Thank you, Peter. Glad to be here.
Wonderful to see you again and to be in this format. One of the first things as I got to know you two better was realizing these people, they have a lot in common. They have made this wonderful life together. They're remarkable and dear to me, but they are rooted in 2 very different worlds, traditions, and ways of seeing reality. Jim, we influence each other. We have effects on each other, especially in relationships like yours. But Jim comes to this relationship with a technical, mechanical, real nuts and bolts sensibility as an investigator, a researcher, a detective. And you come into this world with connections to the ethereal that are not so easily pinned down by the world of footnotes and magnifying glasses and the like. Could tell me a little about your childhood, but for starters, let's talk about your relationship with your sister and your father, both of whom are gone now, but your connection with them in the present for starters.
Well, I guess I reconnected. My sister died actually before I was born. She died a crib death. My parents, like Jim was talking about, met and married during World War II. They'd known each other for 2 weeks, got married. My father was shipped out again. My mom was pregnant when he left. And that little girl was born. He never got to meet her, but my mom got up one morning and she was gone. It was a horrible experience. And I wasn't born until 5 years later. But she was always a presence in my, people talked about her. It was like, we had a very open family, very open to things like that. And so I always knew that I had this sister somewhere. And so she was always with me. And then my father died of cancer when he was only 42, when I was 10, which is also, and we were Catholic, although my grandmother told fortunes and we had that part of our lives that actually isn't so different from Catholicism, where you have all these saint stories and everybody's seeing the Blessed Virgin Mary, and so it all kind of blended in my life. So when we were my dad was president of the men's club, my mother was president of the women's club. We went to the Catholic school, and So when my dad died, it was a very public, we were very much supported by the Catholic Church. And of course, then the nuns, you believed you went to heaven, you believed there was the spiritual side. And so for months after my father died, I knew that he would come to my bedside every night. And I always knew that he protected me and guided me, although he was no longer present on earth.
Yeah.
And so actually through the years, things come and go, life gets practical and busy. And now that we've retired, I've spent a little more, we get to spend a little more time doing this kind of stuff. And I've developed mediumship a little more specifically.
Your fortune telling, in a way, began some years before you were born, which is a wonderful way of explaining it. Can you tell us how this is so? And it's a story that I found fascinating, involving your grandmother and her two sisters, and the family tradition carrying on to you and your cousins.
It is an interesting story. My grandmother and her sisters immigrated from Sweden in the 1910s. And you don't think of Sweden in particular. My other grandmother came from Czechoslovakia during a terrible period of persecution and has a horrible life story that was very brave. My grandma and sisters, they were poor. They were from a farm that wasn't very productive, and they came on the ship thinking they were going to meet rich, handsome husbands in America. That's what you do in America, right? And they somehow ended up in Seattle. I'm not exactly clear why, but they didn't, of course, immediately meet rich, handsome husbands, and they ended up living in a boarding house and taking in laundry, which was not their dream. So Aunt Ruth, the eldest sister, there were some gypsies that camped in the alley behind the boarding house, and they taught Ruth to tell fortunes with playing cards, and she taught her sisters. And so they began doing that. And my grandmother, Esther, especially was good at it. And they weren't entirely, this wasn't entirely a new thing to them, because my great-grandfather, their father, was what they always referred to as a spiritualist. And I was never entirely clear what this meant, except that he talked to spirits, and he had various ways of doing this. So they knew that was possible. So Ruth eventually started a little millinery shop down by Green Lake in Seattle, making hats, and the sisters all made hats. And there was a small back room, and my grandma would tell fortunes back there. And women would come bringing all sorts of strange things in payment for grandma to lay out the cards. And she told with regular playing cards, was how she told fortunes. And everybody in the family did that. And as I always tell everybody, I didn't as a child know that it wasn't weird for everybody to sit around at Thanksgiving and Christmas and tell everybody's fortune for the year. And so I was taught at an early age, and I could do that too. And my cousins were taught as well, although I'm the only one that really continued to do that or become really fascinated by it, although a couple of my cousins are more spiritual than others.
As a practitioner of this form of connection with the more ethereal, fortune telling denotes giving information on things that have not happened yet, as well as things that have happened that you as the teller are strictly not aware of. I'm asking, as just a curious outsider with love and respect and admiration, how you think you are able to do what you do, and based on the reactions that you've gotten your whole life from the people you've done this for, about how accurate would you say your readings are, and how detailed in terms of accuracy?
Well, number one, when I do this work, obviously I put myself in a different place than I'm not struck with bolts of lightning during the day very often. Every once in a while.
Oh, damn. I was sort of hoping that was the case, but continue on.
But you put yourself in a place, and I always surround myself with love and light and protection. And then what you do is you get yourself completely out of the way. And my grandmother had told me that, and I figure that out for myself too. And it's the biggest thing you have to work on, and you learn by practice, just like you learn any other skill. You learn to completely remove yourself, your prejudices, your thoughts, yourself. And you simply open yourself up to the universe and whatever message wants to come through for your client or whoever. And one thing a psychic medium always remembers is we do not work for the people on earth, we work for the other side. And so it depends what spirit or specific spirits want to reveal and need to reveal. That's what's revealed. However, my grandma could honestly, I think, transcend time and space a little bit. And she made predictions. She could see things. Unfortunately, a lot of the things she saw were not positive, but negative. And people don't really want to know that bad things are coming. They don't want to know that at all. And my grandma would slip between the two worlds so often, it became very difficult for her to come back sometimes. And she, toward the end of her life especially, was very unhappy, had a lot of problems. She could never sleep, she tried to commit suicide, a lot of things very negative. So when I decided that I was called to this work and wanted to take this work on, I told the universe that I didn't want to know that. I don't want to know someone's going to get cancer next year.
Right.
I want to know the messages I deliver are supposed to help people realize their tendencies and talents, help them find the best path in this life. You know, and I tell people, the other day, a guy I didn't even know saw my website and called me up because he wanted to know whether he should take a certain job or not. And I said, we'll lay the cards out and we'll see what the cards say. I said, but you know, you really can't make a mistake. I said, if you take one job, it might be a longer way around to get where you're going to go. But if you are truly the person you're supposed to be in this life, if you operate, sounds almost a cliche, but out of love, out of caring, out of generosity, out of, doing what you're supposed to do for others, then you'll succeed no matter what you do. But we laid out the cards, and it looked to me like one job was a little bit more preferable to another. I said there's pros and cons, because if he took the job that looked preferable for maybe his professional fulfillment, it was going to impact his relationship where he was. I said there's no win here, and you're going to have to simply realize that there's going to have to be sacrifices made. So that's kind of what it's about. In fact, along those same lines, when I was reading in a store in Olympia one day, a guy came in, paid his money, and said, it's another thing, he wanted to know whether you're supposed to take a job or not. And I explained to him, just like I explained to you, the card's not going to say yes or no. And he said, yeah, I just paid my $40. I want to know yes or no. And I said, well, I immediately I knew what was going to happen. So I said, okay, I said, there are ways to define that. We can say, like, if we draw an even number card, it's yes, and an odd number card, it's no, if you want to do that. And the cards are laying on the table. I didn't touch them. And I said, okay, you ask the card whether they're supposed to take the job or not, and then you draw a card. So we defined it that way. He took the cards, he shuffled them, he drew a card. And in the tarot, there's the major arcana run 0 to 21. And of course, as I knew, he drew the 0. The tarot would not tell him absolutely yes, because the tarot does not preclude free will, ever, or that you make your own choices. And the same with palms. I didn't finish telling that part of the story. When I got to be a teenager, since everybody in the family could tell cards, I'm an Aquarian, and Aquarians love originality beyond everything else. And so I wanted to have a psychic skill nobody else had. And I don't even remember why I chose palmistry, but I went to the library and checked out every book I could find on palmistry and taught myself to read palms, which is actually reading hands. And your palms more tell your tendencies and talent. I can certainly read people's history. Like I looked at your palm, I told you right away you were an artist, and you are a born artist. That's one of your deep and abiding gifts, is your ability to see beauty and actually participate in creating beauty. And you told me that you had been an artist when you were young. I think there've been artists in your family before you. And it's something, certainly you have a highly developed sense of taste and beauty, and you're just drawn to beautiful things. And so when I read people's palms, I try to give them an insight into their very best selves.
Question for you both, and I'm going to ask you to think about the answer and then come back to it in a bit. Do you feel, coming from your different backgrounds, that the kind of phenomena we're talking about now, as opposed to UFO phenomena, is psychic phenomena, knowing things that under normal mechanical everyday conditions you're not supposed to know or be able to read into, the mechanics of this kind of phenomena, of the cards, of tarot, of palmistry? Do you feel that this is just a series of disciplines or procedures that are surrounded by mystery and unknowable, or that in the same way that other seemingly esoteric subjects are grounded in physics and mechanical realities that we simply are unaware of, haven't figured out, but that they're governed by the same things as the rest of life? It occurred to me when I was young and I first was introduced to the idea of astrology. It was basically in our local newspaper, 5 days a week, there'd be a little box with your astral sign telling you about what kind of day you're having or what to do or whatever, which I really didn't have a great deal of respect for. Right. It's a joke on a certain level. But as I thought about it, and I learned that there were remarkable things that people were being able to establish through a study of astrology. And then one year, many years ago, one of my sisters bought me an appointment with a local astrologer that she and many of her friends had a great deal of respect for. And I did an hour reading and came away absolutely dumbstruck, not just at how much insight she had into who I was without being fed information beforehand, but the nuances of it. So with that long invitation to comment on whether you think that this is just completely in its own mystical world, or that it is governed by principles and laws as real as water boiling at 212 degrees Fahrenheit, I want to ask another question first. Jim, when you guys met and you fell in love and you started to learn these things about Joanne, were you just sort of blinded by love and whatever it is, it's fine with me, honey? Or what the hell is this? Does she really believe this? I've got to learn more about this for myself. Can she establish this for me so that I understand it and accept it? Tell me a little bit about what went on there. I'm really curious.
Well, number one, there are many things that occur, especially if you're a police officer, that you establish the reality of them without having actually been there or having seen it or heard it for yourself. You have to learn how to decide who's telling you the truth and who isn't. The other thing I will tell you is that one of the fundamental tenets, and every day of my life proves this more and more true, the road to enlightenment begins with humility. Nobody solves a case or solves a mystery until you admit that you don't know the answer at the beginning of the road. And you have to open yourself to everything that may be available. And that means that I'm going to run into people who may look at the world totally different than I do. And I have always been a person who was willing to take a look at deeper things, which is why I can proudly state, I can recall several times during my law enforcement career when out of the blue, a witness would look at me really oddly and go, "You're not what we expected of a police." And I said, "Well, I'm sorry. This is what you got." And they said, no, you just see things differently.
Yeah.
And I had a Secret Service agent who paid me the highest compliment. I think one of the highest compliments I've ever received. He said, "You know what I like about you?" He says, "You always look at the big picture." I'm always trying to see what this bigger picture is, that anything that I run into or anyone I may meet, how will this all fit together? And I do genuinely try to accept that other people can see things that I can't see, and they know how to do things that I may not know how to do.
Yeah.
But that does not invalidate them in the slightest. It just means that I don't know yet how they do it. So it's on me to learn it, not on them to say, "Oh no, I'm just a fake. This isn't real."
Your attitude is so welcome. I only wish there were, generally speaking, more people like you in the world, but also in the world of law enforcement and in military law enforcement as well. Did there come a time when you either asked or Joanne simply did something or allowed you to, sit in on a reading or did a reading on you where you came to think something to the effect of, "Holy shit, that's real. How could she have known that or figured that out? Or how did that come? What just happened? What's going on here?" Was there a time, a moment, a situation that embodies that?
I can't think of a particular moment. I guess it was just a gradual understanding that Joanne is a master communicator. One of the best communicators with people I've ever met. I always joke about her and say that if I dropped her in the middle of the Sahara Desert on the hottest day of the year with no possibility of anybody being around for 1,000 miles, and I left and came back after an hour, she would tell me about the 5 people she met, all about their families, who their children were, and where they go to school. She would have that all down.
I'm thinking, as you said that, there are so many ways to get better at things, and many of them don't seem to relate directly. For all of the achievements I've had in the world of UFO studies, I come to it with a formal education, with mediocre high school background, a degree in painting and film history, volunteer work for a suicide hotline, years of work in off-Broadway theater, and it all comes together in a way that I think serves me. And I'm thinking, Joanne, with this open, fascinating family background, who then wants to do something. And my mom was very much in the same place, Joanne. Her best friend became a nurse, and my mom wanted to become a nurse. And she started nursing school with Margie, and she had to drop out. It was just
too much.
We're all, keyed to different things, but that willingness to try, and then becoming one of my heroes, a librarian for 20 years, where communication is essential and where you are constantly, briefly having these extraordinary engagements with people, living their lives, some of them probably painfully shy, but very scholarly, needing a little direction or assistance, then becoming a nurse. And all the skills involved in communicating and putting people at ease or telling them a rough truth. And then maybe most extraordinary of all, and something I have always had respect for since I realized what they were as institutions, but never more than being my dad's home care person the last years of his life, and the last year in particular being assisted brilliantly and at no cost by people from our amazing local hospice here in Ithaca, New York. Your background of skills, Joanne, is amazing in terms of communication. I mean, I can't think of anything else you'd need to add. You've got it all covered in so many ways.
Yes.
I'm very, very blessed to have always had a calling that I got to fulfill, and I was always happy doing what I did. That's a great honor and privilege to be able to say that. And I met so many amazing people along the way. I should say about Jim and his literal. When I met Jim, one thing, we go back a little farther than just the Bigfoot episode, but that's when we started dating and got together. Very small.
And I have to say again, no couple I know have been brought together by Bigfoot. So let's be very thankful for.
But Jim had come into the library. We had a very, very active public. Yeah, there he is. There
you go. Well, a relatively Bigfoot for the small size of the individual.
I have a Bigfoot puppet. I should have brought the Bigfoot puppet out. I used to use that in the library too.
That's hilarious.
He's a baby Bigfoot that I used to tell people very honestly that I captured this creature in the woods, and it's kind of white and gray. And they're when they're babies, they are white and gray. They turn brown later on in life. But anyway, I liked it. But Jim used the library, and I know that Jim is one of the most intelligent people I ever met. Really smart, really good at discussing stuff like books and film and stuff that I was interested in too. So we always had a great time together talking in depth about all sorts of things. So it was really cool to find another open mind, people interested in all sorts of things. The main thing I taught Jim, and I'm still working on it, is the fact that he was told, when we're young and impressionable and people say stuff to us that is not true, but gives us an impression of ourselves that stays forever. And people had told Jim very strange things about himself that simply were not true. I could tell that from not only reading his poem, but knowing him. Jim is an extrovert. He is not an introvert. Just because you're smart and read a lot doesn't mean you're an introvert. It means you're smart. But Jim also has this wonderful ability to communicate with people, and he's a really good listener.
Well, that I know firsthand.
Yes, and that's why he was so good with June and other people and criminals, that he got to confess to incredible things simply by empathizing with them and drawing them out.
Yeah, that's a very important point. Joanne, do you think that your skills, your sensitivity in that other realm are governed by sets of laws as real and as hard as those in physics, or that there is a whole nother a priori, a whole nother reality for us to try to wrap our heads around in understanding the dynamics of non-standard, of paranormal experiences?
Well, it's both. They talk about getting into your higher mind, vibrating on a higher level, all these things that people that are into metaphysics and physics talk about. And it is true. You do have a higher self. When I'm telling fortunes or whatever, I'm talking just like I'm talking to you. I don't have a weird voice or anything.
I'm pleased about that.
but I've gone through something. You know what transmogrification is? It's when a spirit actually takes over your body. I've just done that a couple times. This isn't something I never want to do too often because it's very draining. But that's happened a few times, and you can choose what to let in and what not to let in. But it's been interesting. And how should I say? Our brain is equipped with certain spaces, capacities, chemicals, whatever, to perceive, mostly in an earthly environment through the five senses. And if you're going to ascend to higher realities, they're different and you perceive them in different ways. When I've been in communication with spirits that have crossed, one thing that I've seen are colors, all sorts of different manifestations of colors and colors interacting with each other, which is an interesting way, I think, for energies to be portrayed in a way that you can understand them and see how they are different a little bit. And then I'm more clairaudient than I am clairvisual. So when I communicate, a lot of times I hear messages rather than see things. I see things, but a lot of other psychics I know see things much more vividly.
I want to shift gears a bit, but first I want to ask Jim, as you have gotten to know your wife better and better and observed her doing what she does and at times observing other people, if it's in a context of a conference or colleagues in the field. Do you feel that the work and the skills that she is involved with, again, are governed by the kind of sets of laws that you have to deal with that you used to have to deal with in your work as an MP, then as a police officer, then as a police detective, and then for so many years as an investigator, researcher of the UFO phenomena, where there's a lot of real physical laws and gear, whether it has to do with the transmutation of organic material in a trace case that's come in contact with the UFO or some other paranormal situation, or dynamics of flight being described that do not fit into, what we understand generally about the laws of, flight dynamics. Do you feel that we're talking about two entirely different sets of physical or paraphysical laws, or that there's some unity there, even if we don't understand what it is?
I'd go with the latter. I think that there is a higher unity present. That's sort of an article of faith. I can't really prove it to you. I just kind of know it. I find that almost everybody who gets into this, especially people who've had experiences, I've begun to realize the importance with a good UFO witness is you get all you can from them, you write your report, do whatever, but then come back at them in a couple years and ask them how this has changed them. And almost every one of them will have a broader, more cosmic perspective. And what I really believe is going on, again, I cannot ultimately prove this. This is based on 30 some odd years of interviewing UFO witnesses, reading everything I could, etc. But I get the feeling that we are being gradually prepared for something, a higher level of knowledge and enlightenment. And there will be rules and there will be laws that will operate at that higher level that we can't even anticipate now. We don't even know what they look like or how it would work. But I do believe the universe seems to be orderly, although it may be orderly in ways that we can't possibly understand.
Brilliantly stated. I'm guided by much of the same feelings, and I'm realizing with the great arc of time of being involved in this area of studies, how we change, how we are changed by, and, kind of the cartoon bad, good, pondering, are they like Klaatu in The Day the Earth Stood Still, or are they like Tim Burton's Mars Attacks Martians, the best bad aliens ever? Or are we dealing with a myriad of different types with different intentions?
I think my favorite aliens were in the newest version of The Arrival with Amy Adams, which I think is a stunningly
it's a brilliant film
movie. And I love the aliens because they drew everything in these
it's so original.
And they view time as circular, which is much more of a Native American view of time. That we have spent a lot of time in the Southwest now. We are just drawn to return to the Southwest again and again for reasons that we don't totally even understand. But we love all of our exposure to the Navajo in particular and to Native Americans in general. I have such respect for how they view life and time and what our purpose is on Earth, because now that I'm older, it's becoming more and more clear to me that none of us last forever. It also is becoming abundantly clear to me we only have 70, 80, 90 years on this little tiny grain of sand that is on the shore of the largest cosmic beach that we can possibly imagine. And everything that we learn just leads us to know how much bigger it all is than we ever thought possible.
The way I have kind of come to say that is at a certain point some years ago, realizing in our world, you and I are people who are acknowledged as people who know something about this phenomena. But in reality, it hit me some time back how incredibly little I really know and can establish for me in my low vibrational world in a court of law. The physical or triangulated evidences I could bring to make a case in court, like a cop or a good attorney, for a truly anomalous UFO event.
Exactly.
And that's okay with me. The idea, thinking back on some of the people that I started with, early mentors, Koman von Kavetsky, a former staff officer for the Hungarian military, involved overseeing all photo analysis and photo reconnaissance during World War II for the Hungarian army. And Detective Sergeant Pete Mazzola, a great cop and a great UFO researcher, died much too soon. And thinking when I was younger, gee, they didn't get the answers to the questions that they really wanted. I hope they're okay with that. And as I've gotten older, thinking, well, how am I going to be when fate taps me on the door and I go through it to whatever happens next? Am I going to be good with having spent an inordinate amount of my life trying to find out information that I didn't get the answer to? And I realize the overwhelming answer to that is sure. I think we all want to live interesting lives. And if we're decent people, contributing lives, where we leave things a little better than we find them, where we are of goodwill, where we stand up for things that we believe in, where we are seekers of knowledge and sharers of it. And how bloody boring life would be if we were robbed of our mysteries, if we were able somehow to answer all of these questions in our lifetime. Oh no. It would be kind of a booby prize. And, we'll know what we know by the time we transition, and we either find out the rest of it on the other side or not. And you got anything better to do than, do what you're doing, then do it. And what I want to do now, because again, our time is moving along, is go back to the images that both of you have sent me, with the understanding, Jim, we're going to pick up where we left off with you at the end of the first hour, and invite Joanne to jump in anywhere, because all of them really, are visual materials bringing up real events while you're together. And then we go into the pictures that she has sent. So that understood.
Can I say one thing, though?
Oh, all right. What thing?
We were talking about people thinking literally or not literally, and how we raise consciousness and stuff.
Yes.
I did want to say that a lot of people think they're special. I think almost everybody has had an extraordinary experience. They just sometimes don't want to admit it, or they don't know how to admit. Like this one, I'll just tell this really quickly. We were at a UFO conference, and we were at dinner with these people, and this one lady was going on and on.
Oh,
She'd had some just extraordinary experiences, and they really were extraordinary. And it was dark. We were walking back to our hotel, and she'd come with this good friend, another elderly lady. And I happened to be walking with the friend. And I said to the friend, I said, okay, what's your UFO experience? And she said, well, I never had one. And I said, oh, come on, you had an extraordinary experience. And she looked at me and she said, well, I left a garden. And once when I was out in the garden, a bird sat on my head. And I said, oh, I think that's extraordinary. And she said, but that wasn't the extraordinary part. I said, what was? She says, I looked up and with my eyes, I looked into the bird's eyes, and we knew each other. And actually, I thought that was the most extraordinary thing I heard at that whole conference.
Wow.
And I think a lot of people they haven't seen a silver disc outside in their back lawn. They haven't, all these things, but they've had experiences like seeing the bird and having the bird look back. And I think the accumulation of these experiences and the admitting and the thinking about that will raise everybody's consciousness to get to a place where we can see deeper communication with all sorts of beings.
Mm. Well said.
Now we can go back to your thing with the big.
I'm glad you did that.
Le
Paris. The reason I included this is that one of the other places in San Francisco when I grew up is the Palace of the Legion of Honor, which has one of the original castings of the Thinker.
Rodin.
So to actually get to Paris and see one of the originals at Rodin's home was truly a huge event for me. It made me think of my father and how much he would have liked to have seen.
Yeah. Those are huge events, and they connect us not just with a past, but a longed for past. Like, I wish Dad was here right now.
There you go.
Oh.
That's on the same theme. That particular exact piece of statuary was on loan to the Palace of the Legion of Honor, and I saw that literally 50 years before I saw it in its true home.
Beautiful. Which also brings me to the point of, we do this work, and God knows it really doesn't pay the bills. It can be frustrating. It's increasingly in a field that is like the Roman Colosseum at times, or a sideshow. It's a no-holds-barred entertainment zone for some people, and it's difficult to draw satisfaction sometimes under certain circumstances. However, if we're lucky, doing this work or any work allows us to meet people we would have never met otherwise, some of them wonderful people, and go places that we would never have had a chance to go otherwise, or at least not under those circumstances. And here's, for me, a central thing from childhood on, to be exposed to the world of art and to be elevated by it, to realize you're in the presence of something that makes the spirit feel better, more connected with the world around you, the longing to create something beautiful. And this is my best friend in France, Jean-Luc Rivera, a distinguished ufologist. He arranged my talks in France some years ago, and I'm so delighted to see you with him here. He was very close to Bud Hopkins, and I've known him since the late 70s or 80s, when he was a fairly regular at Bud's studio for a period of years where he was living in New York. So bravo, Jean-Luc.
Yes.
Can I tell real briefly how we got to Paris?
Yes, please.
We had an elderly neighbor in Olympia who was, we met him when he was 98 years old, and he lived by himself on his property, and we got to know each other, and he loved poetry too. He was a physician by profession, and but he loved the arts and he loved poetry, and so we got to be very good friends. And his son, everybody he knew had died. He was 98 years old. His wife had died. His daughter had died. His son lived in Seattle and just wanted to stay in his own house. So we looked out for him until Barbara didn't have to worry. And we hired some other caregivers as he got older. He ended up not dying till he was 101. An amazing person. But we had all sorts of philosophical and metaphysical discussions. But he, after he passed, his son called me up and one day and said, Kathy and I are coming down, and my dad left you something in his will. And I figured Jess had left me some of his books.
Sure.
And so we went out to breakfast, and I always tear up over this, but Robert said, my dad left you 2 weeks in Paris because he said, Joanna's a very good poet, but she's not a great poet because she's never been to Paris. And so they had, the son, Robert, and his wife had been to Paris many times and always stayed in this beautiful old apartment.
I love it.
And if we want, you can stay anywhere you want, but if you want to, we can get you this apartment. So they did. And so we ended up with this all expense 2-week vacation. And at first I didn't want to take it. Robert said, we have plenty of money. Dad had plenty of money. Dad really, really wanted you to have this. He called me in last summer and said,
what a gift.
I know. So we got this. It was beyond amazing, and Jess was right. And every day we went and saw
every day was precious.
a different monument, and I wrote poetry every day, and it was beyond the most magical 2 weeks of
We
our
lived
lives.
we lived in an apartment. The building had been built in 1760 something, and then it was retrofitted with ultra modern plumbing and appliances. We had every convenience, and it had 3 different gates electronic gates to go in and out, and each one was within a block of a metro station.
Perfect.
And we just went.
We could talk about
everywhere.
that forever.
We could talk about
I
that
just wanted
forever.
to
Yes.
inject that and say that's how we got to Paris, which led to all sorts of wonderful things.
And I'm going to guess one of the fastest 2 weeks in your life.
Oh,
Yes.
God, yes. Oh, my God. Although we took a lot of pictures and we talk about it all the time. We remember it vividly.
We really will always have Paris.
I was going to say, my times in Paris have flown by at supernatural speed.
Yes,
Again, that reality of everywhere that you look, you're a human sponge soaking it in. If you're people like us who are predisposed to, just the joy of this unfamiliar but wonderful culture. And good Lord, I have you ever eaten better in your life?
Oh, no.
No.
Never. No.
It spoils you forever.
Jim took French in high school. I took French in college. And so I got us a CD and so we tried very hard. People were so nice to us and they were very impressed with our horrible French.
With our
I was going to say, many people love to hate the French, but that's not me.
No, they were great to us. Really.
I find the ratio of jerks and decent people the same pretty much all over the world.
Yes. So anyway, that's our Paris.
That's our Paris.
Thank you for sharing that. Here we are. This is the cover to the book.
Yeah.
And again, we have 2 remarkable authors here. I hope that you have a chance to read all or most of their work. But if you're looking for one to start on, here it is. Personal accounts do not get any better or better documented in this crazy field where so many people have claims that go beyond the threshold. Very important crash retrieval case, and one that you did your lion's share of work on, Jim. Okay.
That's just kind of a summary of the headlines that were involved and newspaper stories of this crash that happened right near where I was working as a policeman back in 1979.
Gosh.
Oh, there's Monument Valley.
Yes.
We had some very spiritual experiences in the Southwest.
Whether it's Arizona or New Mexico, parts of Colorado or Utah, it looks like a stage set. I mean, this is just
it's another world.
It is. Oh,
Navajo country.
Yes.
Yeah. Gorgeous.
And I always try to give Joanne an opportunity to write because I can tell.
Oh, I thought you were going to say to pray.
No. Well, same thing. I can tell when she needs to go off by herself and spend some time with her notebook looking around.
Yeah. Yay.
Bless his heart. Lovely spirit.
And thanks.
Always so friendly.
I think because of you, Peter, I'm not sure exactly how, but we had never been to the McMinnville UFO Festival until suddenly I got invited.
Yeah.
And what a treat that has been. And we are now fixtures there.
Well,
we are part of the scenery.
Put in a word for me. I was at one time, but now that they have grown to be the juggernaut that they are, it's been some years since I've spoken there or been on a panel discussion, but it really is such
great time,
a unique event. And my first year there, which was, I think, the 3rd year of the festival and conference, it was me and Stan. And both of us had trepidations about it. And, he obviously being much better known and widely respected internationally than I. The idea of working a festival was not something that Stanton T. Friedman did. And I had never worked a quote unquote UFO festival. And we both decided to take a chance. And I found it one of the most perfectly schizophrenic cultural events I've ever taken part in my life.
Exactly.
It was, on one sense, pull out the stops, have a good time, no having fun at people's expenses or the expense of the subject. Have fun with it. And that parade, when you are a grand marshal in that parade and you are going like a mile and a half, being chauffeured in an antique car on a beautiful day with 10,000 people, children painted green, dogs in aluminum foil, every kind of Klingon and Star Trek and every.
It's much fun.
And you're like the Queen of England. You're waving and throwing candy at the peasants and laughing. So I lost my breath. My face hurt from laughing so hard. I loved it. And then this perfect small conference. It's a wonderful event.
A great speaking venue.
And
it's just all pluses.
Yeah. If you can get
we better move along here. I think we're going to run out of gas.
Yep. Well, that's the way it is.
That's okay. We get to it.
There we go.
There we are.
See, that's what Joanne and I, we really get into character.
I told him I would not dress up in a green suit. So
I'll tell you, you both look fabulous.
Yeah.
Dress like that more often. And speaking at UFO Fest.
Yes.
There we are. Yeah, there we are.
That was 2016, and I got to be the master of ceremonies. Peter Davenport is there. Frances Barwood, the councilwoman who lost her job for asking questions. Dr. Kitai, I can't remember the other lady, but her whole family saw the Phoenix Lights.
Yeah.
Two Navajo Rangers.
Yes, two of my favorite people on the planet.
Oh, wonderful. That was when we were leaving the Ozark Mountain UFO Festival in 2017.
Too bad you couldn't get in better company than that.
Oh, it was fabulous.
Wonderful people.
Linda, Travis, Kathy, and Deb.
Yep.
There you go.
Oh.
This is probably the last picture that we know of that was taken of Frankie Rowe. And
she died a few weeks later.
Yeah.
It was at Roswell in 2017.
It's a beautiful shot.
It is. And
yeah.
This just happened. My book is now translated into French.
Oh mon Dieu.
Bien entendu.
Congratulations. That's exciting.
Yes. Joanne.
Okay, now, again, we've got like a minute and a half, but this is your grandmother and her two sisters?
Yeah, grandma's in the middle.
Wow.
Ruth and Marguerite, and they were girls. That was taken in Sweden. My cousin had that photo.
That's one serious hair bow.
Yes, it is.
And I've just got to ask you about this.
Well, that's me and my dog Money. Yes. we got it when I was just a little teeny girl, and my dad got her at the pound, and my dad must have paid money for it, because when we got home, my mama asked what I was going to name her. I said Money. And so we had that dog for many years. She adored my dad. My mom used to stand on the porch and say, "Here, money, 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 money."
There's Joanne at work.
Yeah, I'm telling tarot cards.
Yeah.
I am. And that's my book. It's my poetry book.
Wonderful.
I love the cover. And there's my book about hospice,
which contains a UFO story and a ghost in another story.
Yes. Well, I saw a lot of spirits leaving the body and families experience. We could talk forever about that.
Yes.
Jim and Joanne, I can't thank you enough for being on the show tonight. Believe it or not, we have blown through 2 hours.
Oh, I believe it. Right. It's just like out of time.
Visit Joanne's websites, joanneclarkson.com and joannethepsychic.com. Jim, where can people find you online?
James Clarkson UFO.com, or send an email to UFO detective at hushmail, HUSHMAIL.com.
Outstanding. Next week's guest is going to be a dear friend of mine, a woman who has made a huge mark in this work as a TV host, a researcher, an investigator, and author of this terrific book called Admissible. Chase Kletsky will be with us next week.
Oh, we love Chase.
Yay.
Yeah. This is Meanwhile Here on Earth. If you've enjoyed the show, tell your friends. Take care of yourself. Stay stand up for what you believe in, and be kind. And we'll see you next week.